Hi, and welcome to Camino Talks from Follow the Camino. Today, we are welcoming David Whiting from the United States of America. David is an award winning metro columnist at the Orange County Register and also another dozen other newspapers throughout California. David, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Uh, David, uh, thanks very much for according the time to discuss with you. Today on Camino Talks, we wanted to discuss the Camino, obviously, but a cycling experience. And before we go into that topic, can you just introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Hong Kong. My dad was in intelligence at the time and worked through the Cultural Revolution during those years as a kid, and ended up in the United States eventually. Went to Columbia University for my master's degree, and I've been a senior editor and a columnist ever since.
Very good. Um, Reading through your bio, I also know that you're a bit of an adventurer. You've traveled around, but you haven't just sat and studied. Can you tell me a bit what have you decided during the Camino?
Well, we jumped on the Camino. It was my wife's idea. We'd seen a movie, like many people have, with Martin Sheen called The Way. And she's always out for a new adventure. And I thought it would be fun, a little bit of spirituality in there as well, of course. So we ended up going to the Camino after we'd also been traveling in Botswana, South America, and Namibia. And so we added Spain to that list as well.
Brilliant, brilliant. And may I ask, how did you make the decision to cycle as opposed to walking the Camino?
Well, we're cyclists at heart, and also walking is a little bit. I'm a little. I don't know if I have ADD, but I certainly am not a very patient person. So I like to move quickly. I'm a runner as well as a climber, and we both agreed that it would be more fun to ride on bikes, and we'd see a lot more of the land than doing the hike.
Right, right, right. And can you tell me on cycling, have you done other cycling holidays before or cycling trips?
Yes, we've gone to we've cycled. We've been to Africa twice, cycling in Namibia one point, and then Botswana another time. We were out in the sort of in the wilds, literally, if you will, camping in tents in Botswana and Namibia, which I would highly recommend. Of course, being in nice beds and hotels in Spain is a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, great. So I suppose when you started onto your cycling the Camino journey, you had a good grasp of the whole mechanism of moving every day with the bike and then getting things sorted as needed.
Well, I'll tell you, it was my first time. When we've gone done these other trips, we've been with guides, and this is such a tough route when it's if you start in Oviedo. I mean, at certain points you're traveling over 200 meters, which is of course 6,000 feet, and the people who had signed up for the trip ended up canceling.
And can you tell me, you've done the original way. Why that route? Because you said that you watched the way, and the way is more around the French way. But
Yes, that's true. We wanted with well, Follow the Camino gave us the opportunity to do some of the toughest, most difficult, and really the original way. And we thought, boy, that's going to be a lot more meaningful. And not only was it was tougher, but it really I felt like at times I was going back into the Middle Ages, and you really get a sense of what it was like for people to go up these hills, these mountains by foot, even though we were on bikes. And sometimes we were pushing our bikes on foot and really enter a world that you would never ever otherwise be able to see.
can you tell us a bit more about that? Is it because the original way is a rather remote uh, trail? It goes via very quite remote areas. Is it more of the kind of the villages you went through or things like this?
Well, first of all, the distances are very different, particularly when you're on a bike. So pilgrims back, 1,000 years ago we're hiking up these mountains, going to one monastery to the next. And we were able to go 2 or 3 monasteries at the same time on bikes. But you really get an understanding of the brutality by not only spiritually, but also just the fact that they had to be up on top of a mountain to protect themselves. So you're dealing with, I don't know how that they, where they got their water from. I don't know how that they ended up farming, but a lot of these monasteries, one in particular that we remembered, are literally on the top of a mountain.
Okay, that must be quite something. And can you tell us a bit about what was your typical day?
Well, typically we started out pretty early in the morning, and because we knew that we used to leave, we on our average day, believe it or not, we averaged 35 miles, which may not seem like a long way on a bike, but keep in mind that these are rough, rugged trails with mud, with sticks, with roots, and we averaged over 3,000 feet a day of climbing on our bikes. So that was pretty tough. So we took a lunch, and we always got back by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something, grabbed a glass of wine pretty quickly and settled down into a nap. But it was the experience itself was always really something that was ended up being really spiritual. You're seeing walls, just for example, that were built 1,000 years ago. And there's nothing quite like that. You're seeing cemeteries that have been constructed hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. And so all of that came to be an area where you feel like you're experiencing another world.
And do you meet people along the way? The original route, I think the original route is only takes 5% of the pilgrims on the Camino. So you may have felt lonely or quiet for a lot of the time, no?
It's interesting that you asked that, because we found out that no one was as stupid as we were to try to go the original route. And from until we got to really Leon, almost halfway through, we did not meet anybody on the actual trail.
Yeah, it's I've seen a few people arriving from the original way when it merges with the French way, and it is true that they are not. It is a more rugged, remote trail. Uh, and you were saying that you were cycling on trails. Can you tell us a bit about the actual cycling route? If you did you have the choice? I know that on the French way, for example, uh, you could cycle on the route because it is not mountainy. Therefore, the Camino route uh, is following the main road, right? The main national roads across the various bigger cities. How was it on the original way?
From well, the first part we really had to stay on the bike paths. There was no other choice, and we're glad for that because we probably would have given up maybe a little bit quicker. My wife had been sick the week before, and she started off sick, and we ended up on early on day 2, and she's a mountain bike racer, so she's pretty hardcore. But by day 2, we had some mechanical problems on the bike. I managed to fix those, and then we ended up Google took us, believe it or not, in a completely different area. But that was terrific in a way because we ended up in this tiny little farming villages, and everybody there was easily in their 80s, but they're out there farming, and we never would have seen that if Google hadn't taken us way out of our way. But we ended up at the top. We finally got the top of a mountain, and we realized we're not going to make where we need to go today. And so we were a little panicked. I called the Follow the Camino, and oh my God, everything ended up being very, very easy after that.
Yeah, it is true that sometimes we get carried away in the sense that that's what I find difficult in cycling is that things go faster. So it is true that you cover more ground. But if you miss the turn and it takes 10, 20 minutes to realize, you've covered more ground too. So sometimes even mentally, it's harder to get back on things. So just for other people cycling, I know that we get a lot of people who may have cycled. Usually, our advice is that you shouldn't go on to a cycling holiday unless you cycle and like cycling. What I mean is, your point about covering more ground and so on, I get it. But it's not just the ground. As you were saying, like you had some mechanical problem. I'm not sure if it was a puncture or something of this kind of orders, but cycling adds to the complexity of the trip. A puncture can happen, uh, or other things, and and also a lot of people don't realize. For example, we provide you with a mountain bike, okay? Because on some of these rugged routes, there is no way you you could make it with a cycling bike. It would be too dangerous. How would you? Do you think it's the mountain bike for a Camino kind of context is the right thing as opposed to maybe in Botswana you had racers? I'm not sure.
Well, that's a really good point. If I run, and when I run, I put on my shoes, put on a hat, put on the sunblock, and I go. And when on a bike, it's completely different. And I've been building my own bike since I was in high school, so I can take apart a bike, put it back together. In fact, that's what we ended up doing. Her bike, she has a mechanic because she doesn't trust me, but so it ended up he made the headset at the front of the bike incorrectly, so I had to take apart that on the trail and flip it over and do it right. So if you don't know kind of how to fix your bike and you don't have the right tools, don't do this. Give yourself a break, I would say, and either walk it or take an easier route, maybe on the road. But we both happen to be pretty hardcore cyclists, so we were able to do that.
Yeah, I think the main point is that it's not as if you're cycling in a holiday center or vacation center whereby in 10 minutes anybody can pick you up and bring you back to base where everything is there. As you are cycling, I think you cycle 350 kilometers or 220 miles, something like that.
Yes.
Obviously, at some stage, uh, the previous or the next mechanic might be 40, 50 kilometers away, and it might not even be on your actual road. So it's just something uh, to be aware of. And and uh, tell us about the assembly of the bike when it was delivered. We get that we delivered how was the bike delivered to you?
Now we brought our own bikes.
Oh, you brought your own bike.
So we took them apart, put them in a pack, and shipped them on a plane, and then brought that. And we rode in Africa once in Botswana, and we rented bikes, and they let's just say they weren't quite up to snuff. We had over a dozen punctures in one day
Okay.
because they were tubes as opposed to slime that you can put in
Yes.
that fixes it. So we decided that we would take our own bikes.
Yeah, yeah. For us, what we do is that all of the bikes we have, they have a QR code, and we know which trip they have done and how many kilometers. So, for example, we would measure the chain, and I think the right measure is 59 centimeters. And when we get over 59.5 centimeters, we change it because we know that statistically over the 59.5, the breaking of chains increase. So we try to prevent this. And same thing by putting always an inner tube that have this gel so that for the smaller punctures you don't get bothered as often as if you don't have that. So it's trying to prevent all of these things. But uh, fair enough. And the, can you tell us? Did you have some? You told us about the adventure in that village, and that was medieval. You were talking about people in agriculture or peasants. I suppose, have you seen these people that were maybe cutting grass with a scythe, or like I have seen these people on the Camino, or these older generations, 80s and so on. still cutting grass with a sigh, or really, really old-fashioned type of living? Did you
We
see
saw
something?
people with oxen and iron contraptions, that they pull to plow the fields. I mean, that's incredible. Yes, we saw people in their 80s with size. I mean, and it was just it's inspiring, but in a way, it's also quiet and beautiful. And I'm not breaking my back, so it's easy for me to say that because I'm not out there cutting the grass. But oh my gosh, it takes you. It's like a painting from Van Gogh that you see
Yeah.
out there. It's an extraordinary time where you think about things in a much slower way, and the way life was 200 years ago.
And I think it's a great image that you're making in the sense that by adding the bike, you're increasing speed and progress, but you're adding complexity. And these people with less mechanical tools, I suppose, same thing, they slow down. So I think it's a great image uh, of of that not clash of cultures, but just that in the more remote areas, the older generation are still doing stuff in an older fashion, and it's good sometimes to remind ourselves of that, that it's not all
I like that. I'll mention that we're riding bikes that have titanium and carbon fiber in them, and so it's a yes, a very different world.
yeah. And we were chatting earlier on, and I think you have written a piece about your trip for one of the newspapers you write. I don't know if you wanted to read some of it.
Yeah, it could be that could be interesting. It could be fun. Let me read. I'll try to keep this fairly quick and just read part of it. But it is day two of a 160-mile pilgrimage along the ancient way of St. James. And already the wheels on our bicycles are both literally and figuratively falling off. My wife's nasty flu from the week before has returned. Her mountain bike is rattling where it shouldn't be rattling, and ridiculously steep paths, rocks, mud, and stream crossings suck life out of our legs and lungs. The problem is that before nightfall, we must cover 34 miles and ascend over 4,000 feet if we are to make it to where our luggage awaits in a one hotel village. Yet, just as we wonder what we've gotten ourselves into, we cross a narrow country road. A farmer on a tractor waves. A monastery built of stone that dates back to when the Moors invaded the Iberian Peninsula peeks over a ridge, and I am not making this up, angels sing. Of course, after we catch our breath and wipe the sweat off, my mind returns to earth, and I realize the sweet sounds are birds, but the farmer is very real and very kind, and that is something that reaches beyond the ages. Understand, it is more than likely this man's ancestors greeted pilgrims at this very spot.
So I wanted to ask you a few things. Uh, what memories would you mind when I say you? Obviously, you directly is better, but it could be your wife, maybe some of her experience is good as well. What memories do you take from cycling the Camino? Did you meet one? Is there one person or one image that will remain with you? And maybe the article is that image actually. Not sure.
There are many images, but I'll try to jump through a few. One was as we were talking about the ancient world, where you're looking at a cross, a stone cross. I should point out a crucifixion, really, atop of a monument that has withered and stood the test of time for hundreds and hundreds of years. And you can make it out easily, but at the same time, you can also it's a little bit difficult to make that out, and that's very meaningful. Another time was when we would go into these little towns, and some of them one hotel, and that was where the only place to eat, that sort of thing. And you're sitting down with people over a carafe of wine, And my wife speaks Spanish, some Spanish, and I don't. But at any rate, having a conversation about that, or seeing families with 4 generations eating Sunday dinner together. There's times when, of course, out in Lyon after we went on, where there's hundreds of high school kids with backpacks doing their own Camino and camping out in the woods with little tents and this sort of thing. And the inspiration of that all and the joy when they get into at toward the end and they're hugging each other and they're celebrating this accomplishment. Other times we're in the cathedral in Santiago and a woman lighting a candle. And I think that those are images that are imprinted in my mind and hopefully will never disappear.
Yeah, I, I think I relate to you in the sense that what I said to people is that when you go on the Camino, you slow down. So you allow yourself to seeing these things, which if we were talking about seeing hundreds of kids or people doing this and that, if you go to the mall, shopping mall, you see people doing this and that all the time. But the meaning is gone. Whereas on the Camino, uh, seeing a multi-generational family sitting and having dinner in a restaurant is meaningful. Why? Because we don't do it anymore, or we do it much less. Uh, and so it's just seeing that these things that were common and quite normal are becoming seldom and left aside from daily life and daily activities. And so And so I think the Camino is a good way to realize that. I'm not sure how it was for you.
Yes, it is. I mean, when we get up one morning and we're there, having a little bit of breakfast with some other people and whiling the morning away, suddenly realizing, no, we have to get on our bikes and we have to keep moving from one place to the other. But that original conversation is beautiful. And then you go into a fog shrouded field up in the mountains and not quickly and you're riding your bike through these farm fields and past them that and then we come across a man who wants to know he wants to talk to us and we have this sort of kind of difficult conversation but beautiful conversation and he's all excited that we're from California and he starts singing a Beach Boys song and he's we're he's just California and that sort of connection today, but going on today, along with the backdrop of this guy has been there for generations, his family has been there for generations, is really something.
And your passage by his village and this uh, 30 seconds or 5 minutes, whatever conversation is meaningful to him. It made his day. He had something that he saw that was uncommon and that he could relate with somebody from 10,000 kilometers away. It's
Yes,
it's
yes.
amazing to think about it. Uh, uh, so, I was just I know that you've done other great adventures. You've climbed Kilimanjaro, you've climbed Aconcagua, you've climbed the highest summit
Denali.
in North
Yeah.
America. Um, uh, how would you compare the challenge, difficulty, or challenge of the Camino, of the original way cycling, compared to one of these adventures, if it is possible to?
On a spiritual level, I think they're equal. On a technical level and on a muscular level and trying to do it, I'll have to say that climbing at 23,000 feet without oxygen, carrying a pack that weighs 70 pounds, and when it's 20 below zero out Fahrenheit, um, that's really, and you do it for weeks on end. That's that's really hard.
So I suppose it is still an adventure, but in a more comfortable way. It's
Yes, yes. I mean, incredibly comfortable. At the end of the day, every day, my wife was, I mean, her philosophy is when she goes to bed at night, she doesn't want to sleep on the frozen glacier. She wants to sleep in a bed. And she wants to not have to wait 3 weeks before she takes a shower. She wants to be able to take a bath at the end of the day. And it's a wonderful kind of, during the day you're with this challenge, but at the end of the day, the comfort is fantastic.
Yeah, you're back to normality in a way, and you've got your minimum um, comfort, mod con, as we say.
Yes, yes.
Um, and you know, I like the way you're describing your experience. For me, is that there are some greater challenges and adventures, such as climbing Denali or places like this. Um, but it is still an adventure. And what I think is important for people to understand is that it's not that the harder the better, or the more ground we cover, the better cycling or walking. I think what is important is to know what people want and can do. If you if you hit too high, it will be too difficult, and you're not enjoying as much of these mundane times, landscapes, and so on. Um, you know, we you are extremely fit. You've done amazing stuff, and some of our the people that do the Camino, they are not like that. But it doesn't mean that they cannot have their adventure. It is a slightly gentler level. It is a more safer level, and so on. But I think it can still be an amazing experience for people. How, when you came back home, how did you describe it to your friends and family? What did you tell them about the
I wrote it.
experience?
I write, so I wrote a piece about the experience, of course, and that was primarily what it was. And most people, they they look at you when you start trying to tell them something, and they can't. It's very difficult for them to understand what that experience is like. You have to do it to really appreciate it, to really understand it. Otherwise it's just a bunch of words that are kind of boring and confusing, and why would you end up doing that anyway? This doesn't make any sense. um, I will say that there's also, in terms of danger and that sort of thing, or I overestimated our abilities on this one. And so we had one day where we were supposed to go 6,000 feet elevation gain. And I realized, looking at the map, I thought this is incorrect. This can't be. Nobody could do this. This is crazy. So it must be wrong. Well, no, it was right. It was 6,000 feet. And we took a car. It was like, okay, we had follow the Camino, gave us that opportunity to say, no, 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 we're not going to do this. We're going to have a good time. And that's an important thing, is to know when you hit your limits, whether it's climbing a big mountain or whether it's in the middle of Spain.
Yeah. And this is why we recommend people to go out and practice as much as possible. You don't just show up on a 5, 10 day cycling trip without having gone out for 5, 6 hours ever before. Like, it's not fair on yourself. It's not fair on anybody, because your limit will come and you don't know how to handle it. Never mind that you could go further. People just are overwhelmed with tiredness, with not knowing, and that's building experience. So it's and that's I guess this is what we try to do when we speak to people. We have these people who ring us and say, I would like to walk the Camino 30, 40 kilometers a day. I've run a couple of marathons. Say, okay, but walking 30 kilometers every day for 5, 6 days in a row, it's you get grumpy, you get moody, because tiredness builds up, and when something goes wrong or the weather is a bit wet, the enjoyment is out of it. So your point about knowing your limit, I think, is extremely important and extremely valid.
Yes, I would say that the way to really have fun on a big climb or the Camino is you get yourself at a level of fitness where you can do it easily. So you're not angry, grumpy, and exhausted at the end of the day, but you still have some gas left in the tank.
Yeah, the whole point about training. It's that. Tell me, are there things that you wished you knew before you did the trip?
I wished I knew that that the that well that 6,000 foot day. I wish that I had the brains to understand that that was real.
Yeah,
That was about the only thing. It was, and but we had a backup with Follow the Camino. So um, there were no regrets in that sense. I guess I do wish that we'd had a couple extra days because we should have we should have had a couple of them not quite as difficult, and we should have, I think, stretched it out a little bit more and had a little bit more fun. We were kind of under the gun. We needed to see some people in England, and so we, the time frame was what it was.
yeah. Um, what I'm working on now is to give for every trip for every customer the exact uh, altitude gain uh, graph of everything that people are going to do. So we're still working on it, and we'll get that over soon. And to convert that, for example, in exertion, uh, because we don't understand that 6,000 feet climb on the bicycle might be equivalent to 5 or 6 or 10 hours on flat. So a number is great, but if we don't know how to compare it to anything we know, it's very challenging. In fact. So just trying to bring that uh, to understandable thing. And one thing as well, which is difficult when you go cycling, is if you don't know the terrain. Cycling on tracks, it takes a lot longer than cycling on road. Road, there is no thinking. You follow the white line on the side, and you go straight ahead. Head down. When you're on tracks and so on, you have to pay more attention. You cannot reach the same speed. So these are things to consider as well that are not extremely easy to do.
Yes, yes. When we hit some stairs that were probably 1,000 years old, and which means they were not stairs; they were just kind of pieces of rock and dirt and moss. And so you have to carefully walk your bike down this path, and and then there's a drop. There's nothing there for maybe 3 or 4 feet, and we're handing our bikes down to each other and then kind of climbing down backwards a little bit. So it's not always very, yeah, it's pretty slow sometimes.
Yeah, and I think for those listeners, uh, David is describing the original way, which has some parts which are like this. On the French way, the terrain is easier, and we have a special guidebook that describes the cycling route, which we wouldn't have, for example, for the original way because very few people are cycling it. So it makes it a lot more accessible uh, to more people. Um, I don't know. Have you got any advice? Uh, and tell us about Santiago when you arrived in Santiago. You mentioned the kids that were celebrating. How was your celebration? What usually? I'm saying usually because for me, I've cycled the Camino a couple of times, okay, uh, but I've walked it as well, so I know the difference. But usually, when you walk the Camino, you meet people and you see them along the way for 3 4 days. Whereas when you're cycling it, because people cycle at different pace and so on, that's something you don't. I found that you don't get this camaraderie that you would get while
Yes.
walking. Uh, did you notice the camaraderie, and did, how did you handle? Did you join some of it, or how did you feel about not having the same camaraderie, which is very important for people on the Camino as well?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you. So we got to, the cathedral, and I was taking a picture with this camera my wife had recently given me, and I was taking a little bit of time trying to figure out how to do a selfie with this thing that flips up, and she was exhausted, absolutely exhausted, and we got into an argument. That was the very first and the only argument we had the whole trip. Was the exact moment where we finished our trip, and then took a picture, and everything was lovely. And that was when also all of these school kids were hugging each other and celebrating, and the whole thing kind of came together.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, there isn't always necessarily that moment that you think, we're here. It was more of a now I'm exhausted and I'm grumpy.
Yeah, yeah, that usually happens. No, that's great. Um, so I don't know. Is there any tip? I think the experience you've had and what you've shared with us and our viewers and listeners is great. Uh, I hope that it will inspire other people to cycle the Camino or walk, whatever it is. Uh, is there anything else you think people should know or you want to share with us?
Yeah, I think that I'll just end with sort of the ending that I wrote, and it's outside the cathedral. The boys and girls laugh, hug, and form memories that will last a lifetime. Inside, pilgrims line up to kiss the large silver mantle of St. James in a moment they will never forget. Others light candles and offer prayers that might carry into eternity. For true believers, the pilgrimage of Camino de Santiago is much more than the sum of its parts. It's a chance to touch the holy. But the Camino isn't about distance and it isn't about time. It's about something that reaches far deeper, and this sticks with you.
That's amazing. That's great, David. I think that's a great ending for our talk. I would like to thank you again for joining us today and great talking to you.
Thank you very much, and it was terrific talking to you.
Thank you.